Thanks for tuning in to Look at My JPEG, the podcast that discusses NFT, DeFi, and NFT financialization. This is your host, Xerox Jose, the founder of NFT Perp. The reason why I want to do this podcast is because there's just not enough people talking about NFT financializations. In this podcast, you can expect us to invite guests that are builders, founders, even investors that are deep in the NFT financialization space. We'll discuss their story, what they're building, and how you can get involved. So thanks for tuning in. Welcome to episode 21. Thanks for tuning in. This week, we have an amazing protocol within the NFT finance sector as our guest, Caviar. Caviar is an AMM that is specifically designed for NFTs and is a centralized protocol so that you don't have to rely on a centralized server, perhaps like you would see on OpenSea or Blur. And the founder of Caviar, his name is Tamakoyaki, joined us to kind of dive deep into the liquidity space within the NFT, finance sector. And we're excited to talk more about how NFT AMMs solve liquidity issues within the NFT space. And outside of that, we dive pretty deep into how Caviar specifically solve NFT AMM liquidity for rare NFTs. In the past, we've seen NFTX, we've seen SudoSwap, and Caviar, it's sort of embarked on a journey to solve different liquidity issues for not just the floor NFTs, but really all the NFTs within collections. So we hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. And yeah, let's jump right in.
GM, how's it going, man?
Doing well. Thank you, sir. Thanks for those that are tuning in. It's a little bit small turnout today, but that's fine. These are recorded and uploaded to our Spotify. Welcome to the 21st episode of Look at My JPEG. And today we got Caviar. And the founder, one of the co-founders at Caviar, Tamakoyaki, has joined us. Welcome to the show again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I always it's been a while since I've been on this, but it's always good to listen to and always happy to be here.
Yeah, you are our first or second guest, I think. Been a wild ride, and I'm glad we're still doing these live and getting these uploaded. I hope the listeners are getting some value out of what we're interviewing and the stories and the little golden nuggets coming out of these conversations. I will maybe give us a little intro of yourself and tell us your journey a little bit, and then we can get into Caviar.
Yeah, for sure. So for those that don't know, I'm Tama. Sorry about that. Been in crypto for a while now, since probably like end of 2016, 2017. Got in first on like the trading side, but eventually switched over. My background is in development, so I picked up Solidity, started messing around with some stuff, got into NFTs pretty quickly, made some money, lost some money, how it always goes. So since then I've just been working on a couple projects. Started out with like the first project I did publicly was called Putty. It was a little over a year ago that we started that one. And kind of what that was meant to be was a way for people to trade NFTs or options on NFTs and other illiquid assets like small cap tokens. And that was cool. It was a great learning experience for sure. But kind of throughout that process, we realized that there's a much bigger problem still in the NFT market, which is the lack of aggregated spot liquidity, lack of an easy way for people to provide liquidity in spot markets for NFTs without having to be, like finance majors or anything like that. And so, we were thinking about this and we ended up deciding to, build out our own solution to this problem. And kind of the first step out of 100, if you will, is what's currently live right now on Caviar. So it's meant to be a place where people can buy and sell NFTs instantly, as well as provide liquidity in order to facilitate buying and selling those NFTs.
What was that moment that you guys realized the problem of NFTs, sort of lay, in your opinion, on spot liquidity as you're building out Putty?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is, and this is the case with any market for an illiquid asset that doesn't have like one trading venue, is that the liquidity itself is split up among so many different marketplaces, right? And it's not just that it's a different marketplace, it's the style of liquidity that's put in those marketplaces. So on OpenSea or Blur, where you have like a centralized model with an order book approach, you have people that are competing on bids for each other competitively, right? Then on something like SudoSwap with private pools, you have people that constantly have to readjust their parameters in order to take advantage of some perceived inefficiency that another LP has placed by setting up their own private pool with like a different delta or something like that. And there's really no room for someone who just has some NFTs and some ETH to be able to profit from trading, and like do so in a relatively efficient manner, or at least more efficient than what they would have to do on their own on a platform like Blur or OpenSea, where they have to wait for bids to hit and all that kind of stuff. So that was kind of the main motivation. But just as like equally as important, I think one of the things that shared liquidity positions give is the ability to stack yield, where you can take your LP position and use it, because it's fungible, right? Like one LP token in this pool is equal to another LP token in this pool. So you're able to use it effectively as collateral for loans. You can start tracking it, trading it, whatever. And you can even build like incentivization on top of pools with those LP tokens, which we've already seen with tokens, but really haven't seen that much with NFTs yet. So that's kind of, I would say the two biggest motivations.
Yeah, for sure. I think at the end of the day, for me, like I think tokens are tokens, and I think because of how things have progressed across how NFT collections think about the supply and liquidity across different collections, the illiquidity issue over the last couple of years for NFTs has been a result of that, and I think dating back to like you said, you came into the space around 2016, 2017. Like if you remember back in the day, um, the decentralized exchange, the de facto decentralized exchange was Ether Delta, right? It's an on-chain order book model. It's incredibly hard to use. You fat finger all the time. It's incredibly slow. And then the other options were a centralized exchange. And that's why when Uniswap came out, it was such a 0 to 1 moment. It's like, oh, wait a minute, you can supply liquidity so easily and subsequently allow people to enter and exit positions, with ease. And I think, in a way, what you guys are doing, what like your competitor or maybe you're friends with them, SudoSwap is doing, is that 0 to 1 moment for NFTs, where it should be easy if it's set up the right way, and it should be a trustless way. So I think that's one of the things that I think will improve over time, and that's why I'm pretty excited about Caviar. Um,
Thanks,
yeah,
man. Yeah, of course. Like, I mean, I remember in Ether Delta, you had to like email the guy that set it up to add a new pair. Like those days were pretty crazy. And you're right. Like that inefficiency is what led to a platform like Uniswap taking over. I mean, there were a couple of different people at the time that kind of like had, you know, they had their own implementation of an AMM, and Uni was just the one that stood out, right? And part of the reason was because it was very easy to it was very composable. Uni LP positions were very easy to transact and trade and lock in other protocols, and it's kind of what essentially started the whole DeFi flywheel in the first place. If you're really going back, so yeah, very 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 excited to be working, you know, at the onset of potentially the next wave of something like this.
yeah. So that leads me to the next question. Like, it's fair to say that Uniswap, that SudoSwap, Caviar is sort of the the Uniswap for NFTs. But at what point would the underlying, design choices and protocol mechanisms sort of diverge because of the assets you're using are NFTs. And with ERC20, like the very basic explanations for those that trying to differentiate what NFTs are and tokens are. It's you think about fungibility in a dollar or Bitcoin, like 1 cent equals to the other, $100 bill equals to another, and they're fungible. But with the case of NFTs, is a little bit different. One NFT does not equal to another, and maybe the price does because they're falling in similar rarity in terms of ranges. But yeah, at what point would the protocol mechanisms and design choices sort of diverge from the overall protocol mechanisms and architecture comparing to Uniswap with what you guys are doing?
Sure. Yeah, this is a great question, actually. Basically, like the biggest like distinction here, you're right? Like you're not trading tokens that are completely fungible with each other. You're trading this kind of non-fungible thing that has some price similarities across the collection, but it's only a certain percentage of the collection supply. And so you have to figure out, well, how do we trade? How do we get the ability to trade the entire collection? But more than that, like how does it differ? And how do we increase capital efficiency while still maintaining the premise of what an NFT is supposed to be? And for the second part of that, right, like in Uniswap, in UniV3, when you set up a position, you can create a concentrated liquidity position that doesn't rely on whole amounts of the token to be executed. It's kind of different for potentially for NFTs. One way that we've tried to solve that is by introducing the ability to fractionalize your NFT. So you effectively have a fractional token that represents each NFT asset. And if there are like 50 NFTs in the pool, you have 50 fractional tokens that can be dissected into as small of an amount as you need, right? So that is like one way that we've tried to kind of solve a little bit for the liquidity issue of only being able to trade whole amounts and getting the slippage down for some pools. But long term, in order to be able to trade the entire collection, you're going to have to get a little creative. Like one experiment that we are currently running with FloorDAO is the use of a desirability classifier that we've developed that's able to group NFTs by their desirability or effectively how much someone values that NFT.
But before you get into that,
yeah, sure.
Maybe for those that are listening, why can't you trade all sort of rarities of NFT in a single pool in a, let's say, X, Y, and K curve? What is the issue? Why can't that happen?
Sure. I mean, let's say that you have two assets that are valued at a different price. One is worth $10 and the other is worth $20. If you put them into the same pool, someone's just going to get the one that's worth $20 and pay $10 or $15 for it or $10 for it or whatever the pool price is set to. So they're like effectively arbing away the difference between the two classes of NFTs within the same pool. So it's very hard to group like items that have different prices into one pool. It's something that we've actually spent quite a bit of time thinking about and building out like an implementation for how we can have like weighting within each pool, but it's a little bit further away, I would say, from going live, just because there's a lot of things to factor into it, especially if you don't want to have to constantly re-update the weights and stuff like that. But so yeah, essentially, it's not a great idea to put two assets that are defined differently in terms of price into the same pool, because the more expensive asset always gets arbitraged away at the cost of the cheaper asset.
Yeah, and that sort of happened for a little bit, as far as I know, on Sudo, and that's one of the reasons why it was never really able to serve those mid-tier or rare NFTs, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you would just get them sniped out of the pool, basically.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about Caviar as a whole. How is it different from, say, SudoSwap and NFTX? So these are sort of the leading NFT AMMs out there.
Right. I mean, one of the things that Caviar does is it enforces stolen NFTs. Like we have a filter for stolen NFTs. Because as an LP, if I create a liquidity position, I don't want someone to dump a stolen NFT that I then can't trade or feel bad about owning in the first place. into into my liquidity pool. So one of the things that we've done is allow for people to choose whether they want to accept stolen NFTs or not into the pool, right? And because right now we only have public pools, we default set it to no one accepts stolen NFTs. But with any like private pool edition or whatever, you'll have the ability for individual LPs to make that distinction. We also optionally enforce royalties. So a collection can set on-chain royalties, and then it's up to the user that trades whether they want to trade with royalties on or off. If they trade with them off, obviously their wallet is recorded as having not by us, but on the blockchain itself. This is like a recorded transaction that anyone can see, and so it's up to the collection then to decide what they want to do with that wallet. So we're a permissionless protocol. We don't want to have to say yes, we enforce royalties, or no, we don't enforce royalties. We leave it up to our LPs and our users to decide for their individual pool what they want to do. So that's like another key distinction. The next bit is also like we want to be the wheelhouse for every type of trade that can happen. So whether it's a public pool, private pool, floor asset, non-floor asset, right? Like what's currently on Caviar, we see as just the first step in this whole process. And so as far as I know, the other platforms themselves are choosing to like specialize in one distinctive type of pool, but we want all the liquidity to be housed on Caviar. So whether it's public pools with private pools sitting on top, and then you have, some interfaces that appeal to more DeFi audience, that kind of thing. We want it all there. So that's probably like the biggest differences.
Thank you for covering that. So you mentioned public pools and private pools. I think public pools, the name sort of suggests itself. It sounds just, it's permissionless. Anyone can come and trade. And what does private pool mean? How does one create it? How does one trade on it?
Yeah, so a public pool is where a bunch of people get together and they're able to put their NFTs and their ETH into the same pool, charge the same fee, and go under the same curve. So they've basically combined all their liquidity into one pool, and they share the same LP token that's worth the same between them. A private pool is where one LP gets to specify what curve they want, what delta, essentially what like SudoSwap has done. Although, obviously with our implementation, there's some things we feel we could improve on the original design, make it, a little bit easier and more capital efficient as well. But the general gist is with a private pool, it's one LP in that pool only, and they get to specify all the parameters. With a public pool, it's all the LPs that share a specific parameter set. I hope that's like easy to understand.
Yeah. So why would someone why would someone create a pool like privately? Is it to set the fees different? Is it to set the curve different? Or can they choose to only allow certain people or certain addresses to LP into it, or certain people that only can trade into it?
Like the biggest thing I think is private pools, one, allow you to set your own fees, right? But they also allow you to provide concentrated liquidity. So if you're someone who can very actively manage a pool and think that you can predict where the price of a specific NFT is going to go, then having a concentrated liquidity position that you manage quite actively is a very good idea, because instead of deploying all of your capital across an entire curve from prices 0 to infinity, you can deploy them within like the prices 9 and 11. And if the trading only happens between 9 and 11, 100% of your capital is being utilized, as opposed to 40% of your capital, which is around what you would get from a public XYK pool that goes from 0 to infinity. So you have the increased capital efficiency. Your IL risk is a lot higher, your impermanent loss risk, where if price goes up by a lot or down by a lot, you will suffer more unless you're very actively, managing your pool of pulling it, changing the parameters, changing where, like the price points and stuff like that. So that's like some of the pros and cons of a private pool and what it can give you. In the same token, like a public pool, it's very easy to provide liquidity. You don't have to manage it as actively, but you're going to get less capital efficiency, right? Because your money has to be spread across an entire price curve.
Yeah. And in the case of concentrated liquidity, I would imagine you still have to have a decent amount of inventory in that pool for for prices to not move that much. Obviously, that depends on the units that specific pool is holding. And with the concentrated liquidity model and versus X, Y, and K, like in Caviar, the price of asset is determined by the spread, right? And depending on how at this current time, like you have this state of the AMM where that determines the price, and usually that's determined by the ratio of the two assets. And typically, if you see like there's a bid and ask price, coming into an AMM, how is that different when a concentrated liquidity pool is deployed versus a X, Y, and K pool?
Yeah, so let's assume for a moment that in an X, Y, and K pool, you have to provide both assets in equal amounts. For concentrated liquidity, you can have a one-sided pool if you'd like, or a pool with like only some ETH and a lot of NFTs, or a lot of ETH and some NFTs. And you can specify what delta you want. So like, let's say you only have two NFTs, you may want to have like a larger delta if you're not like super inclined to sell both, or you feel like you want to get good value from both. There's like all sorts of considerations like that you have to make given your inventory, which is why a private pool is generally more cumbersome to set up, right? Because you need to go through all of those, like all of the criteria, and decide exactly what your risk profile is, your goal, your timeline, all of that. And then, most importantly, knowing where price is going to go. That's kind of like the biggest thing for a private pool. So if you can do all that, it makes a lot of sense. But if you can't, then it's, I think, quite hard to do something like that correctly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what the in the case of concentrated liquidity pool, like private pools, do the fractions still apply to it?
So in SudoSwap, you can't fractionalize your NFTs. In like a Caviar private pool, yeah, they would still apply.
There would still be a whole NFT like unit.
You could put entire amounts of NFTs in a private pool. You could also put fractional amounts in a private pool.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And this is quite interesting, right? So as a let's say as an LP, because this is where it gets quite different compared to Sudo. On Caviar, you have the option to fractionalize your NFT. So when it comes to an AMM, let's say Cool Cats, as an LP, I have the option to provide liquidity as fractions, but I also have the ability to supply liquidity as a whole unit. Is that the case?
Yeah. So let's say I have one Cool Cat NFT. I can put that NFT plus some ETH into the pool, and someone else can buy that NFT. They can also buy 0.5 of that NFT. They can also buy 0.1 of that NFT. Now, also, let's say that I've previously bought 0.5 Cool Cats from a Caviar pool. I can also put that 0.5 Cool Cats into the liquidity pool as well. So both fractional and whole amounts can be supplied into the pool as liquidity, and they can be traded as fractional or as whole amounts as well.
Yeah, this is where it gets quite different, and I think that's one of the reasons why, like, if you're able to trade with fractions, you essentially have this, smaller increments, if you will, in between curve for trading. And in some ways, I think maybe Cool Cats is not the perfect example, but let's say you got a collection that the floor price is at 60. You don't have to have several units or a lot of units in the pool for it to be functional in terms of price action being too steep, one entry in, one entry out in terms of units.
Right.
In my mind, you can get a better trading experience because you have the fractions built into the AMM already, as opposed to a two different AMMs operating on siloed.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what we tried to accomplish with our wrapper, with our fractional wrapper. I mean, sorry.
Yeah. And once that's and this is something that maybe we should also talk about a little bit, like how does a fractional token, what does a redemption look like? Is there a redemption fee? Because what I'm used to looking at the fractional ish AMM token would be an NFTX. Like you have this mint function, which takes 5% directly, and then you have a redeem function, which I believe there's another fee for it. So in your case, if traders are able to trade directly with units and or fractions, what does a redemption look like if I were to acquire a one full fractionalized cool cat?
Yeah, so this is there's like an interface for this. I mean, you can do it directly with the smart contracts, but there's also an interface for you to be able to do this. On Caviar right now, there's like a fractionalized tab, and you can wrap and unwrap your fractional tokens using this tab. So if you have one fractional token, let's say, you can go and you can select a specific NFT that you want from the pool and pay a 1% fee for that, or you can. Sorry.
You pay in ETH, right? Or do you need to pay in fractional tokens?
Yeah. So like, if let's say you've deposited liquidity and you want to withdraw that liquidity from the pool, you would pay like effectively you're paying that fee in LP tokens. If you're fractionalizing and you want to withdraw a specific NFT, you would pay that liquidity. You would pay that fee in fractional tokens if you want to just purely unwrap it.
I see.
But if you want, you can select a random NFT from the pool to unwrap or to withdraw, and you would not pay any fee to do so.
Got it. So two questions. Number one, where does the fee go to? In both, LP and also in the case of redeeming NFT. Like when you redeem a specific NFT out of the pool. And a number two question, like if I were to provide liquidity onto Caviar, let's say I've got two cool cats and I got a couple ETH and I put them all in. When I unstake my liquidity, and say the price hasn't moved, and there's several units in the pool, do I get to choose the NFTs that I originally staked to withdraw, or is that random?
So the first one, to answer the first question, all fees go directly to liquidity providers, whether it's buying, selling, or taking NFTs out, like specific NFTs out. To answer the second question, let's say I want to go withdraw NFTs that I've, using my LP tokens that I own. Like it's the same exact process as unwrapping. You can select a specific NFT and pay a 1% fee, or you can withdraw a random NFT and not pay any fee. So that's how the withdrawal process works. If your NFTs that you LP'd are still in there, you can select those to withdraw and pay the fee to withdraw them, or you can select randomly to withdraw a random amount, or a random ID.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And just out of curiosity, as you guys are building out these sort of inventory and because at the end of the day, a smart contract is a smart contract. They recognize the asset type that's inside of this specific quote, a base asset of the curve. Is there any interesting things you guys has being experimenting or building out where flash actions, flash loans could be applied to it? So different assets inside the pool can be swapped as long as the same type of asset is being paid back. Have you thought about that interesting, different composability that you can allow people to, play with inventory?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so maybe this is a small alpha leak or whatever, but in the next version that we're releasing with Caviar, that version kind of pretty heavily focuses on this type of composability. So having this type of functionality in there where you can do actions like what you just described and I mean a bunch of other things. So yes, obviously it's hard to give specifics right now because it's not public, but it's pretty much the main focus of the next version.
Got it. Yeah, super exciting. I think I love how you guys built out different sections of the protocols and how you sort of compartmentalize different parts of the codes, but at the same time keeping that composability philosophy in mind so that it could be applied for many different things down the line that you may not even think of at the moment.
Yeah, right. Like that's always been our goal, is to, build something and release it and not have to wait, months or a year or whatever to release everything all at once. But at the same time, have the same identity within each release, where you can use one part that we've released in the past and then get excited about the new release and use both. Or you can just use, you can stay with the prior functionality. It's not like we are building an improvement directly on top of public pools. It's like we're building out the next piece of the puzzle, and our goal is to just have the entire puzzle eventually.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Are there any things that I perhaps have missed in terms of covering the features and unique value propositions of Caviar?
I feel like we talked about a fair amount. We didn't quite talk about like the desirability thing that we're running right now. If you guys are interested in that, I'd be happy to chat about that for sure.
Yeah. What is desirability? How does that work? How does that impact liquidity in a given collection?
So yeah, like one of the things that we have tried to think about is, how do you trade non-floor assets in an AMM? And the first kind of approach is something that we have been working on for a while. It's our desirability classifier. Basically, it takes different like price data, price estimates from different providers, kind of kills all the outliers, and then weights these price estimates down to a weight of 1 for the lowest NFT weight in a collection. And then it's able to split up the NFTs by their weights effectively into a couple of different buckets, and each bucket can then be put into a pool. So we've only done this for the Milady collection, where now we have a floor Milady pool and a like middle tier Milady pool as well, for the assets that sit above the floor but are not quite rare. And I mean, the mid-tier pool right now is like the second largest pool by TVL on Caviar. It's kind of something that we're a little bit cautious when we roll it out. And the reason we chose Miladies is because relative to their market cap, there's a lot of price history for Miladies. You really do need rich price data in order to get some semblance of accuracy. And so we're seeing how it's going with one collection first, kind of like testing it to see if there's PMF to use something like this, or we have to reevaluate our approach. But so far it's looking pretty nice. Like there's been decent volume. People are generally excited about it. So it's probably something that we'll have to continue in the future. But that's kind of our first take on how you solve for non-floor liquidity.
So tell us a little bit about the difference in between desirability and rarity.
So rarity is the percentage of the supply in an NFT collection that have a specific trait. For example, there's a pink background that only 10% of the supply has, and a green background that 50% of the supply has. The pink background is much more rare as a trait, since less NFTs in the collection have it. But let's say that there's like let's say there's a yellow background that 5% of the collection has, but people don't really like looking at the yellow background. Whereas that trait is more rare for the NFT collection, it may not be as desirable as the pink background or the green background. And so the relative value of the rarity compared to what people like visually think about it, or like how it's been traded, is taken into account into desirability, as opposed to strictly considering the trait rarities for each NFT. And what this allows is for NFTs that have completely different traits to be put into the same pool, because their cumulative desirability is similar. So you could have something that is not so rare, but very aesthetically pleasing, or very useful for like the utility of the NFT collection, be in the same pool as something that is extremely rare, but is not aesthetically pleasing at all, or does not have as much utility, because the relative weights are the same, even though they look and act completely differently. So you're able to achieve some semblance of parity in price, even though the fungibility is even though they're like completely different.
Yeah, this is sort of like, I'm not a car enthusiast by any means, but if you think about like how the E30 or E46 BMW M3s are, even though they are rare, but there are certain specific color paint or certain mileage that's just more desirable. And they may not be as rare as some of the other ones, but those are very, very sought after. Some similar things that can be applied to NFTs. And what are the specific, like, what sort of data points are you looking at when you determine the sort of desirability? Is it sales? Is it trades plus sales? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, I mean, it depends on the collection. Like sometimes the ID of the NFT itself matters for price history. We have like a discovery algorithm that figures out what traits matter for which collection, and or like what features matter for each collection. And then based off of that feature set, we're able to run our classifier to map like the important features with specific weights. And part of that is like also pulling price history, trading history, the trait rarities themselves, even like overall like NFT market history plays a part as well.
What kind of sample size and difference of of deviation that will give you enough statistical confidence, let's say over 85 and 90%, for a collection to work in your desirability model? Does that require time? Does that require volume traded? Yeah, what are some of the parameters that you can share?
Yeah, like well, when you say time, like yes, it does require time, quote unquote, but really it's like a amount of trading history. So the time period could be more compressed as long as there's sufficient trading history. But you're right, like it takes quite a bit of data to achieve some kind of statistical confidence that the desirability classifier is running as it should. One of the things we have going for us is that even if the classifier is not the best at determining like a predicted price for an NFT, it is very good at determining the relative value of an NFT with another NFT in a collection. So even if like the price estimate is off by like 10 or 20%, the relative value between one NFT and another using the classifier is usually very, very very, very high confidence.
Yeah.
So you're still able to generate a great classifier itself, even though the estimate is not that great by itself, because price is determined by the market in an AMM. It's determined by how many buyers and sellers there are and what the liquidity provider's setup is. So right. Like we don't care about the price part. We just care about the relative value of NFTs within a specific collection to each other.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you for covering all of that. So what are the next steps for this specific part of Caviar with your first iteration of the Milady mid-tier pool? How do you guys envision this desirability multiplier or whatever you want to call it? How do you envision it being iterated in your V2 per se?
Yeah, I mean, like a big part is going to be what collections we decide to roll it out with. If we make it available only for public pools, is it also able to be done in private pools? If it's done in private pools, is it something that people can run their own classifier for, or they have to use ours? These are all questions that we're trying to answer, and it's just going to be a lot of like testing for PMF for each specific feature set. But yeah, it's definitely something that's at the forefront of how we think about how we want to roll out subsequent versions and what kind of features they'll actually have.
Awesome. Well, Tama, thank you for taking the time. I think before we go, anything that you like to the listeners to perhaps follow, any I guess like parting words that you have?
Yeah, I mean, this is something I'm not so sure. Like, it's something that's very important to us, where we really, really care about what like people think right now in of the protocol and the feedback that they give us. So I would say like the most helpful thing anyone can ever do is take a look and then DM me on Twitter or Discord, or even just hopping into our Discord, because like we run user interviews very actively. We also just take feedback very seriously. And so we want to know like how we can build the best interface or the best contracts or whatever it's going to be, the best design for anyone that wants to use our platform. So that is like probably the biggest thing I can say. Other than that, obviously you guys know the deal. You feel free to follow us on Twitter, or just hop in our Discord and say hi. I'm very active, so I'll always be there to answer your questions or help you guys get set up, or whatever needs to happen. We can take care of it, no problem.
Yeah. For those that are, but I do have a feedback for your front end. I had a freaking dark mode, man. This thing is too bright.
So that's actually okay. Maybe we can do a poll. Would people rather have private pools first or dark mode first?
Dark mode. That's 100%.
That's probably the most requested feature, is adding dark mode. We'll get dark mode on. Don't worry.
All right, folks. Follow Caviar on Twitter. That's at CAVIARAMM. And follow Tama on Twitter. I don't have his Twitter handle with me right now, so I guess you have to find it. It's been a pleasure having you on. It's always been a good chat whenever I have you on calls. So thank you.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks so much for having me. And everyone check out NFT Perp too. Some very interesting deals going on you guys can take advantage of. So yeah, just check them out.
100%. All right. Have a good one.
Take care, guys.
Take care. Thank you for tuning in to Look at My JPEG podcast. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your audio podcast from, give us a like, a subscribe if you like the content, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.